Okay, so it's that time of year where we have to do a little bit of a self-evaluation. It is not the time to be hanging your head if your team is not doing very well. At the same time, if your team's on fire and you're hot and everything's working on all four cylinders, this is not the time to be slacking off either. This is the point in the season in which even if you're having a rough start to the year, you still have a chance, most likely at least, to make the playoffs. And that's the key. That's the icing on the cake. That's the only thing that you actually need to do for a chance at the championship. It doesn't matter if you haven't been performing well. You need to be focusing right now on trades and waivers and things that are going to give you the best opportunity to succeed in the later season or the later half of the season. Like I said, you just need to make playoffs, and then you need to perform well going into the playoffs. And there's a lot of things that you can do to make that happen. Today we're going to talk about just some friendly reminders, things that'll help you have the best opportunity and the best chances to get to playoffs and perform well in the playoffs. And then we're also going to talk about some legends. See if you're a legend today based off of who you picked up at the beginning of the season, who you avoided at the beginning of the season, and then a couple other things that I just want to throw in there. But what's up, guys? Welcome back to FFT. I'm Trevor. Let's check it out. Okay, so let's start with a few friendly reminders for you guys. I want to make sure that these aren't things that you've forgotten about since the start of the season. Obviously, going into the season, if you did your research, there's things that you were focused on going into the season. And a lot of those same principles still apply halfway through the season. So let's go ahead and go down through this list. First of all, depending on your standings for your team, you're going to have different strategies for the remainder of the season and going into playoffs. For example, if you're not doing very well and you have players that aren't performing very high at a high level, they're not really trending up, you want to be looking to trade for or acquiring somehow, whether it's through waivers or trades or depending on how your league's set up, you want to be targeting players with higher ceilings. Yes, you're the team that has to take a little bit of a larger risk based off the current structure of your team. You need, in order to succeed and make it to playoffs and perform well within playoffs, you need players with a lot of potential, with a lot of, they don't need to fluctuate in points, but you're looking for players that have the potential to give you huge games. And so players like that could be like the Justin Fields, where, he started off very poor and came up and had a couple great games before he got injured. Players like the DJ Moores or George Pickens, people like that have a lot of potential to give you big games and compensate for weaker parts of your roster. So that's the first thing to be paying attention to as a potentially a team that's not doing so great. If you're a team that's excelling and doing well, don't be stagnant. You cannot just sit on your players and hope that they continue to ball out from week to week to week. Obviously, there's exceptions to this rule. If you're sitting on, like a Kenneth Walker, and you're sitting on Christian McCaffrey and Jamar Chase and all these players that are studs, I doubt you have all of them. But what I'm saying is, don't make trades just to make trades. But at the same time, don't be a bum and just watch your roster do its own thing. You got to make sure that you're seeing the bye weeks coming. You're making sure that you have, the backups to some of these bigger name guys, so that if they go down later in the season, you have a replacement and you have the opportunity to still have that higher floor, as opposed to the teams that aren't doing so great that need a higher ceiling. So that's the first thing I'm going to say. If you're doing excellent, let's make sure you remain and you hold on to your floor, that you don't let it drop below what it's currently at. You want to continue to see that climb throughout the remainder of the season. So first thing to say. Second thing to say is let's talk about trade targets for the remainder of the year. There's a few things to note for this. So first of all, rookies. Let's keep in mind that even if the rookie you have hasn't been performing very well at the beginning of the season, We all know that rookies get more playing time. They become more aware of how the team operates, and they become more comfortable in their role. So I'm talking about players like JSN, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, guys like that, Jahmyr Gibbs, that I think are only going to continue to get better and have more snap count and a higher percentage of snap count and more opportunities with the ball the later we go into the season. So this could be an opportunity for those teams out there that need players with a lot of potential. Let's start targeting some of those rookies that I just mentioned. There's other ones out there as well, but absolutely some of those guys. The other thing is you're looking for players that are trending up. It doesn't need to be rookies, but it does need to be players that, like I said, are going to give you the best opportunity to succeed. This does mean taking a little bit of a risk on some of these people, but I know all of you have people that are on your bench, have been on your bench the entire year. You're holding on to them in case there's a breakout. It may be time to look at dropping those players and acquiring players that are actually already getting some usage and have the opportunity to break out. Obviously, there's players like Charbonnet and people like that that have, if they've been on your bench, they do have an opportunity later in the season to do crazy things. So maybe don't drop people like that, but let's look for players that are trending up and have already seen some game time. Let's also take a look at strength of schedule. There's a lot of teams out there that played, like the Cowboys defense and the San Francisco 49ers defense, the Jets defense, teams that have great defenses. And so that's why they didn't perform well at the beginning of the year. I'm thinking like Ramondre Stevenson, for example, had kind of a rough start based on the teams that he played early on, and he might have an easier kind of path forward. And so players like that are also people that I'd be targeting. People, your league mates may not have, understood that the reason they weren't performing is because of the teams they were playing. It wasn't necessarily their fault. There's players like Rachaad White who don't seem to be great, but are getting a ton of volume. I'm not talking about the Rachaad Whites. I'm talking about more like Ramondre Stevenson, Josh Jacobs, maybe a little bit as well. I think Garrett Wilson is going to continue to get better as Zach Wilson becomes more comfortable in the pocket and with his offense. So guys like that. Also be paying attention to injuries. There have been a lot of injuries, a lot of questionables and doubtfuls, even this week that have gone out there. So be paying attention to those and who their backups are, and making sure that you're aware of those injuries as they occur. I mean, something that we should all be aware of, but these are just, again, friendly reminders. The PUP and IR. So that if there's players on the PUP list, I'm thinking of guys like Kyler Murray who may be coming back. It doesn't just affect Kyler Murray. It also affects Hollywood Brown and other guys that are part of that team. So make sure that you're paying attention to those guys as they're coming off of the PUP. Again, Jonathan Taylor, he's been active for a couple weeks now, but I think that he gets worked into the system more. Even with Zach Moss there doing well and doing great things, I think players like that be paying attention to. Maybe worth trading for. We talked about those high ceiling players that you want to be acquiring. And then the last thing is bye weeks. Obviously, we all know there have already been a lot of bye weeks, but let's make sure that we're paying attention to people that are on bye weeks. If you're trading for somebody, just a small tip, and it may not be that helpful for some of you, but if you're trading away somebody, I would recommend trying to trade away somebody that has yet to have their bye week or one of their bye weeks, and looking for somebody that has already had a bye week, and so that you're having the best possible usage out of that player, making sure that every single week you have the opportunity to play them if needed. So that's the last thing I'll say about that. Waivers, obviously week to week, don't give up. The people that give up and don't even pay attention to people on waivers are the people that deserve to lose. There are a lot of gems out there every single week. Don't spend all of your fab in 1 week. Don't stop paying attention to waivers, because the waivers is a great place to find people that can turn your team around. Think of players like Zach Moss. Think of players like Kyron Williams. Think about players like Puka. Some of these guys that were on waivers early on that are now doing exceptional things for their teams. It can still happen halfway through the season. It doesn't need to be week 1 and week 2 that you need to turn your team around. Again, like I'm talking about, we want to be building our teams so that they're powerhouses going into the playoffs. It doesn't matter if you're up against a guy that's 7-1 or whatever it is right now. As long as you make it into playoffs and you have a better team by the time you get there, that's what matters. Last thing, last tip. Let's make sure that you guys have the people that are in your flex are not the Thursday night game. If they're playing on Thursday, get them out of your flex. Put them in either the RB or wide receiver spot so that they're not taking up a flex spot if you guys need to shift gears. That's the last thing I'll say about that. So those are my tips. All right. Next thing I want to talk about is just something kind of fun. I want to be calling out the legends of your league. And what we're going to talk about is if you drafted certain players, if you avoided certain players, and if you ended up stacking certain players. I want to call you out because if you ended up with all these players on your team, I want to see it. I want to see a screenshot of it. Go ahead and post it down below. Leave a comment. I'd love to know what you guys think and who you guys grabbed. If you were lucky enough to grab one of these guys or smart enough to grab one of these guys, I'd love to hear about it. So let's talk about it. First, you are a legend if you drafted one of these players. First one we're going to talk about is Kyren Williams over Cam Akers. Now, a lot of people were stoked about Cam Akers going into the season. They thought, okay, last year was a fluke. Cam Akers is going to be the man. And lo and behold, Kyren Williams took over quickly. And he has been, I can't remember where he stands. He's like a top 4 running back on the year. He's doing exceptional things. If you drafted Kyren Williams over Cam Akers, I'm not saying you drafted both of them. If you drafted Kyren Williams as just sort of a backup in a later round, nice work, my friend. Also, let's talk about Puka Nacua. Anybody out there draft Puka Nacua? If you did, you're a legend. I'm not talking about the people that picked him up off of waivers, because at that point we all knew he was hot stuff. I'm talking about the people that drafted him. If you drafted him, like I said, I want to see a screenshot. I want proof that you actually did that, because I don't know very many people that actually drafted Puka Nacua. Exceptional things. Also, if you did draft him, I need your contact information because we need to start buying some lottery tickets together. Number 3, DJ Moore. Now, DJ Moore's story is kind of cool. I talked about him early on in the season. I said that he was doing very cool things in the preseason games. I was very excited about him and his potential. He did not have a great start to the season, but he has turned it on, and I am now very excited. If you drafted DJ Moore, you are a legend. Let's talk about Jordan Addison. Man, that kid is fun to watch, especially with Justin Jefferson out. He could be the number 1 wide receiver on the year if JJ wasn't coming back, if he started the season off without JJ. Jordan Addison, man, Kirk Cousins just has a million weapons. Am I right? Gosh, you are a legend if you drafted Jordan Addison over like JSN, over some of these other guys in the earlier rounds. It just goes to show that you need to be paying attention and doing your research on these rookies. You need to be doing research on later round picks. Don't just be practicing in mock drafts these first 4 to 5 rounds. You need to be stacking up your team every single year and figuring out who is valuable. What about George Pickens? George Pickens was more of like a Kenny Pickett bet than he was like a George Pickens bet. It was like, do you have faith in Kenny Pickett or not? It was kind of what you were gambling on if you acquired George Pickens. But if you picked him up, you are a legend. Number 6, Sam Laporta. This year, there were so many tight ends you could have acquired, both rookie and otherwise. We're talking like TJ Hawkinson and Dallas Goedert and Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce. But if you picked up Sam Laporta over like a Dalton Kincaid, over like a Luke Musgraves or Jake Ferguson or some of those other guys, rock on. You are a legend. And then finally, let's talk about the quarterbacks, Brock Purdy and CJ Stroud. If you drafted either of those guys just hoping that they were going to be the real deal this year, obviously we had a little bit of a glimpse into who Brock Purdy was, but just a gamble on CJ Stroud, especially with Anthony Richardson out there or Bryce Young, you, my friend, are a legend. Let's talk about the avoided section. You are a legend if you avoided these players. Nick Chubb. Gosh, RIP Nick Chubb. I feel bad for the people that drafted Nick Chubb. I, for one, thought that he had the opportunity to be the number 1 running back on the season, on the year. And we'll never know. We'll never know. Injuries are a frustrating part of the game and are hard to watch, especially for these players that have put their heart and soul into this game and have been working religiously through high school and college to get to this point. It's hard to see for sure. You are a legend if you avoided Joe Burrow. Now, at the beginning of the season, I talked about his injury and how his calf was in a sleeve, and and how he kind of re-aggravated it going into the year. I know that he still has the potential to be great, and I think that he will do great things the remainder of the season, but he has not helped teams in these first few weeks. He has actually, honestly, performed worse than like the Baker Mayfields and other guys out there that you could have picked up off of like waivers, or they're still out there on waivers. He was sort of this false diamond, this I don't know what you call it, but somebody that was, he was like a siren, somebody calling it in. It looks shiny, but ended up hurting you in the end. I'm excited, and I hope that Joe Burrow does well in the remainder of the season. But if you acquired him in one of the first or second rounds, he's honestly just been hurting your team up to this point. Calvin Ridley is another one. You're a legend if you avoided him. There was a lot of hype. I talked about him before the season. I was excited about him. He seemed like he was the real deal coming into the preseason. He was making exceptional plays. I thought that Trevor Lawrence was going to take the next step. And it's not that Calvin Ridley hasn't been performing. He's had a lot of almost touchdowns. And honestly, it's been a lot of bad Trevor Lawrence play as well. So it's not all on him. But I would have loved to see more out of Calvin Ridley up to this point. Same thing with CeeDee Lamb. You're a legend if you avoided CeeDee Lamb. I unfortunately took him in one of my leagues in like the second round. And being a second round pick where you have these high expectations and hopes for players, he has let me down tremendously alongside Dameon Pierce. Now, luckily, I don't have any shares of Dameon Pierce, but he is that guy that everyone thought was going to be the workhorse, was going to be the knight in shining armor this year, that was going to be kind of the lower rated but high tier running back. He has not panned out. I still think he has opportunity to, but he's not the guy that we hoped for based on where we drafted him this year. Absolutely. And the last category, I guess I'll say, is you're a legend if you avoided Kansas City wide receivers in general. Kadarius Toney, Rashee Rice, Sky Moore. None of these guys are really hitting the bar in terms of where we drafted them. There are a lot of question marks around all these guys going into the year anyway, and I'm very aware of that. And so it was kind of like you were picking up one of them, hoping they were going to turn into something exceptional and be the Tyreek Hill of the Kansas City Chiefs. But it hasn't panned out that way. And so if you ended up spending like a somewhat high round or middle round on one of these guys, you're not very happy, especially when you could have gotten somebody a lot later that is, a top 20 wide receiver at this point. So you are a legend if you avoided any of those guys that I listed. Finally, let's talk about these last three. You are a legend if you stacked Kirk Cousins and Jordan Addison. You're a legend if you stacked Stephon Diggs and Josh Allen. You are a legend if you stacked Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown. Those are really the only three stacks that I'm really excited about. Obviously, you've got like the Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, which hasn't been great up to this point. Jamar Chase has been doing well. Joe Burrow, not so hot. There's others out there like Patrick Mahomes is great, obviously, but who would you be pairing with him? So there's others out there that are still doing work but aren't as crazy as these stacks. If you ended up with both of these players on each of these teams, you are most likely poised well to make it to the playoffs and do well in the playoffs. So you are a legend if any of those things happened. I'd love to hear if you're one of those guys that picked any or all of these guys off your team or on your team or avoided some of these players I talked about. I'm really glad you guys stopped by. Please like and subscribe if you guys want to see some more FFT content. I obviously cover fantasy football, but I also cover the Nebraska Cornhuskers. I'm a big college football fan, and I love myself some Cornhuskers. So please stop on by. And like I said, like and subscribe if you guys want to see some more of my content. But until then, I'll catch you later. See you guys.